Ophelia didn't mean to barge into the Alpha King's private study at midnight. She never expected to find him like that, the most feared man in the kingdom, caught in an act so intimate, so vulnerable, it stole the breath from her lungs. She'd only been looking for her missing uniform, the one she'd left hanging in the servants' quarters that morning before her shift ended. She'd searched everywhere, the laundry, the linen closets, even the other maids' quarters in case someone had taken it by mistake. It was old Marin, one of the night cleaners, who'd given her the strange tip. Saw someone in a dark cloak carrying something gray into the east wing earlier, Marin had said, her roomy eyes curious. Didn't think much of it at the time, but if you're missing your uniform... The east wing, where the king's private chambers were located. It made no sense. Why would anyone take her uniform there? But Ophelia was desperate enough to check, even if it meant venturing into parts of the palace where servants rarely went after dark. She'd crept through the corridors, her heart hammering, telling herself she'd just take a quick look and leave. But when she rounded the corner and saw warm light spilling under the door of the king's personal study, a room that should have been dark and locked at this hour, every rational thought fled her mind. Someone was in there. At midnight. Possibly with her uniform? The pieces didn't fit, but curiosity pulled at her. Besides, she couldn't afford to lose another uniform. They were expensive, and she'd already spent half her meager savings replacing the last one that had gone missing 2 weeks ago. So she'd pushed open the heavy oak door without announcing herself, her pulse thundering so hard she could barely hear her own footsteps. What she found inside would change everything. King Colton stood with his back to her, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the moonlit gardens. Her uniform, the simple gray dress with its white apron, was clutched in his hands, and he was holding it to his face, breathing in deep, deliberate inhales like a man drowning, and her scent was his oxygen. Ophelia's breath caught in her throat. For 3 endless seconds, neither of them moved. The only sound was the crackle of the fireplace and her own pulse thundering in her ears. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to forget what she'd seen, to disappear into the palace's corridors and never speak of this again. But her feet remained rooted to the floor. Then Colton's shoulders stiffened. He lowered the uniform slowly, carefully, like it might disintegrate if he moved too quickly. When he turned to face her, his expression was carefully blank, but his eyes gave him away. Storm blue and wide with something that looked dangerously close to panic. Ophelia. Her name on his lips sounded like a confession, like he'd been caught committing a crime he couldn't talk his way out of. She'd heard the stories about King Colton. Everyone had. The bloodied crown, they called him. The young king who'd taken the throne 3 years ago in a brutal coup against his tyrannical uncle, executing half the old council without trial in a single blood-soaked night. They said he was ruthless, unforgiving, that he ruled with an iron fist and showed mercy to no one. People whispered that he was more wolf than man, that his beast was always too close to the surface, that violence followed him like a shadow. Looking at him now, this feared king clutching her uniform like it was a lifeline, Ophelia couldn't reconcile the monster from the stories with the man before her. He looked lost, vulnerable in a way that didn't match his reputation at all. Ophelia, apologize. Bow your way out of this room, she told herself. Instead, she heard herself say, "Why do you have my uniform?" Colton's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he might order her out, have her thrown from the palace, or worse. Kings didn't explain themselves to servants. Kings, especially this king, didn't get caught doing whatever this was. But then his shoulders sagged, and something in his carefully constructed armor cracked. "Because," he said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion, "when my world is spinning apart, your scent is the only thing that feels real." The words hung between them like a confession. She'd worked in the palace for 2 years, 2 years of keeping her head down, following orders, being invisible. She'd chosen this life precisely because of its anonymity. After fleeing Draven with nothing but the clothes on her back and a terrible secret, she'd needed to disappear. The palace was enormous, bustling with hundreds of staff. She could hide in plain sight, just another gray uniform in an endless sea of them. Or so she'd thought. "I don't understand," she whispered. Colton set her uniform down on his desk with deliberate care, but his hand lingered on the fabric for a moment too long. "Neither do I." He dragged a hand through his dark hair, disheveling it further. "I've been unwell for months now. Dizzy, paranoid, can't think straight around anyone. The palace healer finds nothing wrong, but I know something is. My mind feels like it's fracturing, like I can't trust my own thoughts." He turned back to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her want to step back, but she held her ground, even as her heart raced. "But when I'm near you?" His voice dropped lower, almost a growl. "Everything clears, the fog lifts, and I can think again." He paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. "I started noticing it 2 weeks ago. You'd pass in the corridor, and suddenly the world made sense for a few precious moments. So I started tracking you through the palace like—" He stopped himself. "Like a predator," Ophelia thought. "I've been stealing your things," he continued, the admission clearly costing him. "Your uniform, a ribbon you dropped in the East Wing, a handkerchief you left near the kitchens. I know how it sounds, but your scent." He closed his eyes, breathing in like he could still smell her from across the room. "Lavender and clean linen and something uniquely you. It quiets my beast." Ophelia should be terrified. This was the bloodied crown, the king who'd painted the throne room red with his enemy's blood. He was admitting to stealing from her, obsessing over her scent like some kind of— "I'm being poisoned," Colton said abruptly, opening his eyes. "I'm certain of it now. Someone close to me. Someone I trust. The symptoms come and go, but they're getting worse. And I don't know who to turn to, who I can trust. But you—" He took a step toward her, and she noticed for the first time how exhausted he looked, how the shadows under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and barely controlled panic. "I need your help." "I'm just a maid," Ophelia said, but her voice wavered. "What could I possibly—" "You're the only person in this entire kingdom who makes me feel sane." The raw honesty in his voice made her chest tight. "I don't know why. I don't know what it means. But I'm asking, not ordering. Will you help me?" Before we continue, please take a second to like this video. It tells me you want more stories like this. Ophelia stared at him, her mind racing. Her survivor instincts told her to request a transfer to the kitchens, somewhere far from this dangerous king and his dangerous needs. But something in his expression stopped her. Beneath the exhaustion and the barely leashed desperation, she saw something she recognized. The look of someone who'd been fighting alone for too long. She knew that look, because she'd seen it in her own reflection every day since fleeing Draven. "If I help you," she said slowly, "I need something from you first." "Name it." "If we discover who's behind this, you can't just execute them without trial." She had no idea where the boldness came from, challenging the bloodied crown to his face. "I've heard the stories about what you did when you took the throne. I won't help you add more blood to your hands without at least trying for justice first." Something like surprise flickered across Colton's face. "You're not afraid of me." "I'm terrified of you," Ophelia corrected, "but I'm more afraid of what happens to good people when bad ones are never held accountable." For the first time since she'd entered the study, Colton smiled. It was slight, barely there, but it transformed his face entirely. The sharp angles gave way to something warmer, almost boyish. For a heartbeat, she forgot she was looking at the bloodied crown and saw only a man, handsome in a way that made her pulse skip despite every warning ringing in her head. Very well. Truth for truth, and justice before vengeance. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? Ophelia looked at his outstretched hand, and she made a choice that would reshape both their fates. She took his hand. The moment their skin touched, something electric shot up her arm. Colton's eyes widened, his pupils dilating as his grip tightened, reflexively around her hand. What was that? She breathed. Colton stared at their joined hands for a long moment, his thumb brushing across her knuckles almost unconsciously. When he looked up, his expression was complicated. Surprise, wonder, and something that looked almost like fear. Nothing, he said, but his voice was rougher than before. He released her hand slowly, like it cost him something. Just static. Dry air. They both knew it was a lie, but Ophelia didn't push, even as her palm still tingled where his skin had touched hers. The next morning, Ophelia received a summons from the head housekeeper. Her stomach dropped. Had someone seen her entering the king's study last night? Was she about to be dismissed, or worse? But when she arrived at the housekeeper's office, the older woman simply handed her a new assignment. You're to be King Colton's personal attendant, effective immediately, the housekeeper said, her sharp eyes studying Ophelia's face for any reaction. His Majesty requested you specifically. Ophelia kept her face carefully neutral, even as her stomach flipped. The housekeeper's expression remained unreadable, but her tone had an edge to it. It's unusual for the king to take notice of any particular servant, let alone request one by name. You'll see to his chambers, his wardrobe, and attend him during his private hours. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. I don't know what you did to catch his attention, Ophelia, and I don't want to know, but you'll be discreet. Whatever happens in the king's chambers stays in the king's chambers. Do I make myself clear? Perfectly clear, Ophelia said quietly. So this was Colton's solution. By making her his personal attendant, he ensured she could move freely in and out of his private quarters without raising too much suspicion. It was clever, she had to admit, but also dangerous. She reported to his chambers that evening just as the sun was setting. Colton answered the door himself, which surprised her. Most nobles would have an assistant for such things. He'd shed the formal attire from the night before. Now he wore simple black trousers and a loose white shirt, the top buttons undone, and the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His dark hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it, and without the leather armor, he looked younger, more human, and unfortunately for Ophelia's peace of mind, even more attractive than she'd realized. Come in, he said, stepping aside to let her pass. His private chambers were sparse for a king. A large bed dominated one wall, unmade and looking like he'd spent a restless night in it. A desk overflowed with documents and maps. Bookshelves lined the walls, packed with volumes on everything from military strategy to ancient poetry. The only real luxury was a massive stone fireplace that cast dancing shadows across the room. And hanging on the back of a chair, still radiating her scent, was her uniform from last night. Colton followed her gaze and had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I'll return it. He trailed off, jaw tightening. Keep it, Ophelia said impulsively. If her scent truly helped him, if it gave him clarity when everything else was chaos, then what harm could it do? If it helps. The gratitude in his eyes was almost painful to witness. Tell me about the poisoning, she said, steering them back to safer ground. When did it start? What are the symptoms? Colton moved to his desk, rifling through papers until he found what he was looking for. 4 months ago. Started gradually. Moments of dizziness I attributed to stress. Then came the paranoia. I'd be in council meetings and suddenly everyone felt like a threat. My advisors would speak and their words sounded like conspiracies, even when I knew rationally they weren't. He handed her a piece of parchment covered in his handwriting. Dates, times, symptoms. He'd been tracking it meticulously. The episodes are getting worse, he continued, lasting longer. Yesterday, I nearly gutted my own guard captain because I was convinced he was reaching for a weapon. He was adjusting his belt. Colton's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. At himself or the situation, Ophelia couldn't tell. I'm losing control of my own mind, and I can't afford that. Not now. Why not now, specifically? Because there are rumors of unrest in the eastern provinces, border skirmishes with Draven. If our enemies sense weakness, if they think I'm slipping. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Ophelia studied the parchment, her eyes scanning the dates and names with practiced efficiency. Growing up in an orphanage in Draven, she'd learned early that survival meant noticing things others missed, which caregivers were crueler after drinking, which children stole from the younger ones, which patterns of behavior preceded punishment. It had been a game at first, then a necessity. Old habits died hard. The episodes seemed random at first glance, but then she noticed it, the same name appearing again and again. You're always with the same people when it happens. Lady Vespera is present for nearly every incident. Colton's expression darkened. Vespera was my father's most trusted advisor. She's been by my side since I took the throne, helped me navigate the transition after the coup. I trust her completely. Maybe that's the point. Ophelia set down the parchment. If someone wanted to poison you without suspicion, they'd need to be close. Someone you trust, someone whose presence wouldn't raise questions. You think Vespera is trying to kill me? I think someone is, and right now, she's the best suspect we have. Colton paced to the window, his movements restless and predatory. Even now, even in his own chambers, he moved like violence was always an option. Why would she? What does she gain from my death? I don't know yet, but we need to find out. Ophelia hesitated, then added, There's something else. You said you feel clear-headed around me, that my scent helps. Has anyone else had that effect? Colton cleared his throat, looking almost sheepish. No, just you. Then we need to understand why. Because if Vespera is using poison, and I'm somehow counteracting it... She trailed off, unwilling to voice the question that had kept her awake all night. What if there was something about her? Something connected to the terrible secret she'd been hiding for 2 years, that made her Colton's cure? Colton turned from the window, and the intensity of his gaze pinned her in place. There's something you're not telling me. Something about yourself. Everyone has secrets. Truth for truth, remember? He crossed the room until he stood directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell cedar and winter storms rolling off him, close enough that her treacherous body wanted to lean in, to breathe, him in the way he'd been breathing in her scent. I've bared mine. Your turn. Ophelia's heart hammered. She could almost smell the smoke from her nightmares, the purifier's pyres, the white-robed figures chanting as they burned anyone suspected of being demon-touched. She'd spent 2 years running from that fate. But Colton was right. If they were going to solve this, he needed to know. I'm from Draven, she began, the words feeling like shards of glass in her throat. I fled 2 years ago because I have an ability, a gift, or a curse, depending on how you see it. What kind of ability? She met his eyes, searching for disgust or fear, but finding only intense curiosity. I can neutralize poisons. If I touch someone who's been poisoned, my body absorbs it, I guess, breaks it down harmlessly. It's not something I can control. It just happens. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Colton breathed. You're extraordinary. Of all the reactions she'd braced herself for, wonder wasn't one of them. In Draven, abilities like mine are considered marks of demon-touched bloodlines, she continued, needing him to understand the full weight of what she was confessing. Shameful. Dangerous. When I was 16, I accidentally neutralized a poisoning, touched a merchant's hand, and he recovered instantly. His family noticed, spread rumors. I fled before the purifiers could cleanse me. Cleanse you. Colton's voice had gone cold, lethal. What does that mean? Execution. They burn anyone suspected of being demon-touched. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. I've been hiding ever since. Took work as a maid because servants are invisible. No one looks twice at us. I see you, Ophelia, Colton said quietly. He moved closer, his eyes burning into hers. His hand lifted as if to touch her face, then dropped. You could never be invisible to me. Then, before she could process those words, he added, Show me. The ability. What? He pulled a small knife from his desk drawer, and before she could stop him, he dragged it across his palm. Blood welled up immediately, bright red against his skin. Colton! Ophelia lurched forward, but he caught her wrist. If you can truly neutralize poisons, then touching me when I'm having an episode should help, yes? His eyes were fierce, burning with something between hope and desperation. I need to know if this is real. If you're real. You're not poisoned right now. Then let's test the theory another way. Heal this. That's not how it works. I don't heal wounds, I just... But her protest died as she pressed her hand to his bleeding palm. The moment their skin connected, that same electric current raced through her. Except this time it was stronger, brighter, like touching a live wire. She felt it. The poison in his system, subtle and insidious, woven through his blood like dark threads. Her ability responded without thought, reaching for it hungrily. The toxin started flowing from him into her, and she felt it dissolve, the wrongness burning away to nothing inside her. Colton gasped, his free hand gripping the edge of the desk so hard the wood creaked. I feel it. The fog. It's lifting. Ophelia tried to pull away, overwhelmed by the intensity of the connection, but Colton's hand clamped around her wrist like iron. His other hand came up to grip her hip, holding her in place. His eyes had gone wild, storm blue irises nearly consumed by black, more wolf than man. Don't, he growled, the sound rumbling from his chest. Don't let go, please. So she stayed, her palm pressed to his as her ability pulled poison from his blood in waves. Heat built between them, his body running fever-hot as the toxin left him, her own skin flushing from the effort and his proximity. His grip on her hip tightened, fingers flexing against her like he was fighting the urge to pull her closer. She could feel his heartbeat thundering against her palm, could smell cedar and winter storms and something wild rising off his skin. It wasn't all of the poison. The toxin was too deeply rooted for one session, but she felt the worst of it burn away inside her. When she finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard, faces inches apart. Colton's pupils were blown wide, his chest heaving like he'd run miles. That was... Colton started, then seemed unable to find words. He looked at his palm, at the cut that had already stopped bleeding. Then he looked at her, and the expression on his face made her chest tight. You're my cure. Whatever Vespera has been doing to me, you can undo it. Not permanently, and not all at once. The poison is too established. Ophelia's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. But yes, I can help manage the symptoms. Give you clarity when you need it most. Colton reached for her, his hand cupping her jaw before he seemed to catch himself. But he didn't pull away, not immediately. His thumb traced along her cheekbone, his touch reverent and possessive all at once. His eyes had darkened to stormy midnight, fixed on her mouth like he was contemplating something reckless. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough and low. The words sounded more like a vow than gratitude. Ophelia's breath caught. She found herself leaning into his palm, her lips parting slightly. Colton's gaze dropped to her mouth at the movement, and a low sound rumbled from his chest. "You have no idea what you do to me," he murmured, his thumb brushing dangerously close to her bottom lip. "What I want to do right now." "Tell me," she whispered, the boldness coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. His eyes flashed. Pure wolf, pure hunger. "I want to taste you. I want to bury my face in your neck and breathe you in until your scent is all I know." He cut himself off, jaw clenching as he fought for control. His hand dropped from her face, but slowly, reluctantly, fingers trailing down her throat before falling away entirely. The loss of his touch felt like a physical ache. Ophelia cleared her throat, forcing herself to focus. "We still need to stop whoever's poisoning you. Find the source." "Agreed. But now we have an advantage they don't know about." A dangerous smile curved his lips. "We keep your ability secret. Let Vespera, or whoever it is, think their plan is working. Meanwhile, you stay close. Keep me clear-headed enough to investigate." "So I'm your secret weapon. You're my shield, my clarity in the chaos." His expression softened. "But only if you're willing. I meant what I said last night. I'm asking, not ordering. You can walk away from this if you want." Ophelia thought about the past 2 years. Every decision had been pragmatic, calculated for survival. Where to hide, who to trust, when to run. She'd learned to make choices with her head, never her heart, because hearts got you killed. But looking at Colton now, she saw a man fighting to be better, and her heart yearned to see if he could win that fight, even as her head told her you can't reform a ruthless king. "I'll help," she said, "but we do this smart. No rushing in, no executions without proof. We find out who's behind this and why, and then we deal with them properly." "You have my word." The steel blue of his eyes caught the firelight. Despite his reputation, despite the blood on his hands, something in the way he looked at her, unflinching, sincere, made her believe Colton was a man who kept his promises. She just hoped she wasn't a fool for trusting that. Over the following week, Ophelia settled into her new role as Colton's personal attendant. It gave her unprecedented access to his private life, his chambers, his schedule, the people he met with, and more importantly, it gave her time to observe. Lady Vespera visited the king daily, always bringing tea from her personal stores. "For your health, your majesty," she'd say with a sweet smile. She was beautiful in a cold, calculated way. Silver blonde hair always perfectly coiffed, dresses that whispered old money and older power. Colton would drink the tea to avoid suspicion, and within an hour, Ophelia would see the symptoms return. The way his jaw would tighten, his eyes growing distant and suspicious. The way he'd position himself defensively, like everyone in the room was a potential threat. And then Ophelia would find an excuse to be near him, straightening his desk, adjusting the curtains, anything that allowed casual touch. The moment her hand brushed his arm or shoulder, she'd feel the poison and draw it out, giving him temporary relief. It became a dance between them. He'd look at her across the study, and she'd know he needed her. She'd move closer, and he'd lean in under the pretense of discussing some document, breathing in her scent like he was starving for it. "Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with powers or poison," Colton said one evening as she reorganized his bookshelf. Ophelia glanced over her shoulder. He'd abandoned his paperwork and was watching her with open curiosity. That's a dangerous question, Your Majesty. Colton, he corrected. And why dangerous? Because my life has been exceptionally boring by design. She pulled down a volume on military tactics, blowing dust off the cover. Boring keeps you alive. Indulge me anyway. So she told him about old Marin, who'd taught her to read by candlelight using stolen books from the palace library, about the kitchen cat who'd had kittens in the linen closet last month. Small, safe things that felt enormous in the telling because no one had cared to ask in years. Stolen books? Colton's eyes lit with interest. Which ones? Fairy tales mostly, though I struggled with some of the words. She felt her cheeks warm. I never had formal lessons. My reading is rudimentary at best. Something shifted in Colton's expression, a softness that made her breath catch. I could help with that. He gestured to the shelves surrounding them. Every evening we could read together. You could pick anything you like, and I'd... He trailed off, then met her eyes. I'd like to know what stories you love, and maybe share some of mine. It was such a simple offer, so domestic and normal, worlds away from poison and assassination plots. The idea of curling up beside him while he read aloud, of stumbling through passages while he patiently helped her, it felt more intimate than any kiss. And so they did. Every night, after the investigation and the careful dance around Vespera, they carved out 15 minutes that belonged only to them. Ophelia would choose a book, poetry one night, adventure stories the next, and they'd sit close together by the fire. His patience never wavered when she struggled with a word, and his pleasure when she made it through a difficult passage felt more precious than any compliment she'd ever received. It was in those quiet moments, his shoulder, warm against hers, and his voice wrapping around old stories, that she began to fall. You smell like lavender today, he murmured one such evening, his lips far too close to her ear for propriety. They'd abandoned the pretense of reading minutes ago, the book lying forgotten in her lap. It's just laundry soap, Ophelia managed, very aware of the heat radiating from his body. No. His hand came to rest on the small of her back, possessive and warm through her dress. It's more than that. Something uniquely you. Makes me want to... He trailed off, his fingers flexing against her spine. You have no idea what your scent does to me. Colton, she breathed, a warning and a plea all at once. I know. He pulled back with visible effort, but his eyes remained dark with want. I know we should stay focused. Doesn't stop me from wanting it, though. Neither of them acknowledged what it was, but if the attraction between them was complicated, the investigation was proving even more so. 2 days later, Ophelia had managed to acquire a sample of Vespera's tea, smuggling it to a healer she trusted in the city. The report came back confirming poison, but with a twist. It's not designed to kill, the healer had explained, keeping her voice low. This is something far more insidious. The poison creates disorientation and paranoia around most people, but there's an antidote component woven in. Someone taking this tea would need regular doses of a specific counteragent to feel normal. Without it, they'd spiral into madness. And with it, Ophelia had asked, though she already suspected the answer, they'd become dependent on whoever controls the antidote, psychologically and physically. Now, standing in Colton's study with that knowledge burning in her chest, Ophelia watched Vespera pour another cup of poisoned tea. You seem well today, Your Majesty, Vespera said, her smile sharp. Not troubled by those dizzy spells you've mentioned? I'm managing, Colton replied, his voice carefully neutral. Vespera's eyes flicked to Ophelia, who was organizing books on the far shelf. I notice you've taken on a personal attendant. How quaint. It's efficient, Colton said smoothly. I grew tired of different servants rotating through, Consistency is valuable. Of course. But Vespera's gaze lingered on Ophelia a moment too long, calculating and cold. Though I do hope she's trustworthy. One can never be too careful about who they allow close. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so dangerous. After Vespera left, Colton waited a full minute before crossing to where Ophelia stood. His jaw was tight, his hands flexing at his sides. He stopped himself, meeting her eyes. Can I? He didn't finish the question, but Ophelia understood. She could see the poison already working on him, the way his pupils had started to dilate unevenly, the slight tremor in his hands. She nodded and watched as relief washed over his face. Pulled her against him, one arm banding around her waist while his other hand cradled the back of her head. Then he buried his face in her neck and breathed in deep. She's getting suspicious, Ophelia murmured, even as her hands came up to grip his shoulders. Every time he did this, inhaled her scent like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to sanity. Something inside her softened and yielded. I don't care. His lips brushed the sensitive spot below her ear, and she shivered. Tell me what you learned. So she did, explaining the healer's findings about the antidote-dependent poison. How Vespera's plan was to make Colton reliant on her, paranoid of everyone else, until he had no choice but to turn to her for relief. What's her endgame? Colton's arms tightened around her. Marriage? Control of the throne? Probably both. The healer said the dependency would be complete within 6 months. By then, you'd do anything she asked just to feel normal again. Except I have you. His voice had gone rough, possessive. You're breaking her hold without her realizing it. For now. But Colton, she's going to figure it out eventually. When she realizes the poison isn't working the way it should. Then we move first. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and the wolf was there in his gaze, predatory and fierce. We confront her, get a confession, and end this. No. Ophelia pressed a hand to his chest. A confession obtained under duress isn't justice. It's just you getting what you want through intimidation. We need real evidence. The poison itself, documentation of her plan, witnesses who can corroborate. Something that can't be explained away as a forced confession from a terrified woman. His jaw clenched. You think I'd torture her? I think your reputation precedes you. And if we want the court to believe this is justice rather than another purge, we need proof they can't question. The struggle played across his face. The old Colton who would have simply eliminated the threat versus the man he was trying to become. Finally, he nodded. Then we get proof. But we do it fast, before she decides you're too much of a risk to leave alive. A chill ran down Ophelia's spine. She'd been so focused on protecting Colton, she hadn't considered that Vespera might view her as an obstacle to be removed. As if sensing her fear, Colton cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. I won't let anything happen to you. Do you understand me? You're under my protection now. I don't need... Yes, you do. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, the gesture achingly tender coming from hands that had killed so many. You've been fighting alone since the orphanage, haven't you? No one to catch you when you fell, no one to stand between you and the world. His eyes were fierce with emotion. You're risking everything to help me. You've given me my mind back, Ophelia. Let me give you safety in return. Let me protect you. Please. The vulnerability in that last word, the raw gratitude in his voice, it shattered something she'd kept carefully locked away. All her life, she'd been the only one she could count on. The orphanage had taught her that protection was a lie, that you survived by being small and quick and silent. But here was this dangerous king, asking to be her shield. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Colton's expression transformed, relief and something raw washing over his face. He took a step toward her, then another, his eyes never leaving hers. Ophelia, he said, her name rough in his throat. The pragmatic voice in her head told her to step back, remind him of all the reasons this was impossible. But instead, her body closed the distance between them, rising on her toes as his hands found her waist. The first brush of his lips against hers was tentative, almost questioning. Then something broke in both of them. He kissed her like he'd been starving, one hand sliding up to cup the back of her neck, while the other pulled her flush against him. His mouth was hot and demanding, tasting her like he couldn't get enough. Ophelia's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, kissing him back with equal hunger. When he backed her against the bookshelf, caging her in with his body, she gasped, and he took advantage, deepening the kiss until she forgot how to think. Heat built between them, his body a line of fire against hers. She felt his restraint fracturing with every passing second, the control he always maintained slipping away. His hand flexed on her hip, his thumb stroking the sliver of skin where her dress had ridden up. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Colton pressed his forehead to hers. His breathing was ragged. "This is dangerous," he said, his voice wrecked. "If the court finds out, if my enemies realize what you mean to me, you'll have a target on your back I can't always protect you from." "I know. They'll say I'm taking advantage, that you had no choice. But I do have a choice." Ophelia's hands framed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "And I'm making it." For 2 years, she'd chosen safety over everything, chosen invisibility, isolation, the half-life of someone perpetually hiding. But Colton had seen her, truly seen her, and instead of fear or disgust, he'd shown her wonder, gratitude, desire. "I'm not naive," she continued. "I know what you've done. I know the blood on your hands won't wash away just because you're trying to be better, but I also know the man you're becoming, and I want to see where this goes, even if it's dangerous, especially because it's dangerous." "Why?" His question came out almost pained. "Because I spent my whole life being afraid, and I'm tired of it." She swallowed hard. "You make me want to be brave enough to choose something for myself instead of just surviving, to risk everything for something real." Colton's eyes searched hers, intense and burning. "This is real, Ophelia. What I feel for you. It's not just the poison clearing my head, not just gratitude. I want you, need you in a way that has nothing to do with your ability and everything to do with who you are." "I know. I feel it too." His kiss this time was softer, sweeter, full of promises neither of them could voice yet. When he pulled away, his expression had shifted to something mischievous. "When this is over," Colton said quietly, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her wrist, "I'm going to take you somewhere you've never been." "I've barely been anywhere," Ophelia laughed. "That's not much of a challenge." "Then I'll take you everywhere." He pulled her closer, tucking her against his side. "The northern mountains where the hot springs run year-round, the coast where the cliffs drop into the sea, anywhere you want to go." "I've never wanted to go anywhere," she admitted. "I've only ever wanted to hide." His arm tightened around her. "Then I'll show you what it means to be safe instead of hidden, to have a home instead of a hiding place." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You'll never have to run again, not because you can't, but because you'll finally have something worth staying for." They spent the next hour strategizing, planning how to catch Vespera in the act. But as Ophelia finally left his chambers that night, her lips still tingling from his kisses and her heart fuller than it had been in years, She couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The attack came 2 nights later. Ophelia was returning to her quarters after attending Colton through another evening when someone grabbed her from behind, clamping a cloth over her mouth and nose. She struggled, trying to scream, but the cloth was soaked in something sweet and cloying that made her thoughts fuzzy. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Vespera's cold smile. She woke to stone walls and the smell of damp earth. Her head pounded, her mouth felt like cotton, and her wrists were bound behind her back. Panic clawed at her throat as she took in her surroundings, a cellar of some kind, lit by a single torch. No windows, one heavy door. Finally awake. Good. Ophelia's head snapped toward the voice. Vespera stood in the corner, looking as perfectly composed as always, hair immaculate, dress unwrinkled, as if kidnapping servants was just another item on her evening agenda. "Where am I?" Ophelia's voice came out hoarse. "Somewhere the king won't find you. At least, not in time." Vespera crossed the room with calculated ease. "You've been a problem, dear. A significant problem. I don't know what you're— Don't insult my intelligence." Vespera's hand shot out, gripping Ophelia's chin hard enough to bruise. 4 months I've been poisoning him. 4 months of carefully calibrated doses designed to make him dependent on me. And then you appear out of nowhere, and suddenly he's clear-headed again, his symptoms improving instead of worsening. Ophelia tried to pull away, but Vespera's grip was iron. At first, I thought perhaps he'd developed a tolerance, but then I watched you two. The way he looks at you, the way he breathes you in like your oxygen. Her smile turned vicious. "You're an antidote, aren't you? Some kind of healer?" "No. Lying to me now would be very unwise." Vespera released her chin, pacing. "It doesn't matter. Whatever you are, you're ruining everything I've worked for. So you're going to die, and it's going to look like a tragic accident. A servant girl who tragically took her own life, overwhelmed by the pressures of serving the king." Fear spiked through Ophelia's chest. "He'll know. Colton will know you did this." "Will he?" "He'll be devastated, certainly, grief-stricken, and in his grief, vulnerable." Vespera pulled out a small vial filled with clear liquid. "This is a concentrated version of what I've been giving him, enough to stop your heart within minutes. They'll find you here, the bottle in your hand, and assume you poisoned yourself. Tragic, but I'm sure they'll have a new maid by morning." She advanced on Ophelia, who scrambled backward until her shoulders hit the wall. "Wait," Ophelia said, desperately trying to buy time. "Why are you doing this? What do you gain from controlling Colton?" Vespera paused, seeming to consider whether answering was worth her time. Finally, she smiled, cold and empty. "Power, of course. I was the old king's lover for 20 years. Advised him, guided him, shaped policy from the shadows, and then he died, and his nephew took the throne." Her expression twisted with bitterness. "The bloodied crown. So young, so brutal, so certain he knew better than everyone who'd served this kingdom for decades." "So you decided to poison him into submission?" "I decided to teach him that he needs me. That ruling requires experience and wisdom, not just violence and intimidation." Vespera uncorked the vial. "In 6 months, he would have been mine completely, would have married me to secure the loyalty I represented, and I would have guided him, shaped him into a proper king instead of the monster he's becoming." "He's not a monster," Ophelia said fiercely. "He's learning, growing, becoming better than the man who took the throne 3 years ago." "Because of you?" Vespera laughed. "How sweet. The maid who thinks she can redeem the bloodied crown. Let me tell you something about Colton, dear. He is exactly what he appears to be. A killer. a man who solved his problems with mass execution. That darkness doesn't just disappear because some servant girl shows him kindness. You're wrong. Vespera knelt in front of her, the vial in one hand. Well, I suppose you'll never know. Her fingers clamped around Ophelia's jaw like iron, nails digging into soft flesh. Ophelia jerked back, but Vespera's other hand fisted in her hair, wrenching her head still. Pain exploded across her scalp. Hold still, dear. Ophelia clenched her teeth tight, but Vespera's thumb forced its way between them, prying her jaw open with brutal efficiency. The vial tilted. Ophelia could smell the bitter chemical. She thrashed harder, her vision blurring with tears as she tried to wrench her head to the side. The vial touched her bottom lip. At that moment, the door exploded inward with such force that it tore off its hinges. Colton stood in the wreckage, chest heaving. His eyes had gone pure wolf, glowing in the torchlight, feral and focused entirely on Vespera. A growl built in his chest, so low Ophelia felt it vibrate through the floor before she heard it. Get away from her, he snarled. Vespera jerked back, the vial tumbling from her hands. It shattered on the stone floor, clear liquid spreading between the cracks. Your Majesty, she gasped, but Colton was already moving. 3 strides was all it took. His hand shot out and closed around her throat, lifting her off her feet. Her boots scraped against stone, toes searching for purchase that wasn't there. You poisoned me! His voice was eerily calm, a stark contrast to the beast burning in his eyes. Made me doubt myself, doubt everyone around me, made me feel like I was losing my mind. His fingers tightened. Vespera's mouth opened in a silent gasp, her face flooding crimson, then purple. Her hands clawed at his wrist, nails scraping uselessly against skin that might as well have been stone. And then you took her. Vespera's eyes bulged. A choked, wet sound escaped her throat. Colton, don't! Ophelia threw her weight against the bindings, the rope biting deep into her wrists. You promised. Justice, not vengeance. Remember? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't listen. The wolf was too close to the surface, the rage too consuming. She could see him warring with himself, the man who'd executed half a council without trial, versus the man who'd promised her he could be better. His jaw clenched. A muscle jumped in his cheek. Then, with a snarl of effort, he threw Vespera away from him. She crumpled onto the floor. Wet, desperate gasps tore from her throat as she clutched at her neck, rolling onto her side. You'll stand trial, Colton said, his voice still rough with barely controlled fury. You'll answer for your crimes in front of the full court, and if they find you guilty, and they will, you'll hang like any other traitor. He turned to Ophelia, and the wolf receded just enough for devastation to replace it. His gaze dragged over her, bound wrists raw and bleeding, tear-streaked face, the red marks already darkening on her jaw where Vespera had gripped her. A sound tore from his throat, somewhere between a growl and something broken. 2 quick movements and the ropes fell away. Then his hands were on her, pulling her up and into his arms with barely controlled desperation. He crushed her against his chest, one hand cupping the back of her head, the other splayed across her spine like he could hold her together through sheer force of will. Are you hurt? His voice cracked. His hands were trembling as they moved over her, down her arms, across her shoulders, tilting her face up so he could search it. Did she tell me she didn't? No, I'm okay. Ophelia fisted her hands in his shirt, anchoring herself to him. Her legs threatened to give out, but he held her steady. She pressed her face into the hollow of his throat, breathing him in. How did you find me? Your scent. He pressed his lips to her hair, breathing her in. I always know where you are. My wolf never forgets. Guards appeared in the doorway, and Colton ordered them to take Vespera into custody. As they hauled the older woman away, she looked back at Ophelia with such hatred that it sent chills down her spine. "This isn't over," Vespera hissed. "You think you've won? You think he'll choose you over his kingdom? You're a servant, a nobody, and when the court finds out—" "That's enough," Colton snapped. They dragged Vespera away, her threats echoing down the corridor until a door slammed and cut them off. Alone in the cellar, Colton pulled Ophelia closer. She could feel him trembling with residual adrenaline and rage, the wolf still prowling beneath his skin. "I almost lost you," he said against her hair. "When I went to your quarters and found you gone. When I caught Vespera's scent mixed with yours." His arms tightened. "I would have burned this entire kingdom to ash to find you. You didn't have to. You found me in time. Barely." He pulled back just enough to cup her face, and his eyes were still more wolf than human. "I'm going to kill her, Ophelia. Trial or no trial, justice or vengeance, she threatened you, and I can't let that stand." "Yes, you can." Ophelia covered his hands with hers. "Because you're not the man who took the throne 3 years ago. You're better than that. You're the man who chose mercy over murder, who promised me justice. Don't throw that away because you're angry." "I'm not angry." His voice dropped to a growl. "I'm terrified. Terrified of how close I came to losing you before I'd even had the chance to—" He cut himself off, but Ophelia heard what he couldn't say. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm safe, and we're going to do this right together. Vespera will face justice. Real justice." Colton closed his eyes, fighting for control. When he opened them again, the wolf had receded enough that she could see the man beneath. "Okay," he said finally, "but you don't leave my sight until this is over. She has allies, Ophelia, people who helped her, who might come after you to protect themselves." "I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her then, desperate and claiming, like he needed to consume her to prove she was real. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back as he deepened the kiss. Ophelia responded with equal fervor, her fingers digging into his shoulders, kissing him like she could crawl inside him and never leave. When he finally tore his mouth away to blaze a path down her throat, she gasped his name, half prayer, half plea. Her pulse hammered against his lips, proof she was alive, that her heart was still beating when it so easily could have stopped. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colton whispered against her lips, "We need to talk. About us." "After the trial," Ophelia replied. "After Vespera is dealt with and the poison is gone from your system, then we figure out what we are. I already know what you are to me. Enlighten me." His smile was crooked, vulnerable. "You're my mate, Ophelia. My wolf knew long before I did." The bond between them flared bright at his acknowledgement, that invisible thread pulling them together, making them whole. "And you're mine," Ophelia said softly. "My ruthless king who's learning mercy, my wolf who fights himself to protect me. My choice." "After this is over," Colton promised, "I'm going to court you properly. Give you everything you deserve. I just want you. You have me. You've had me since I first caught your scent, and I clearly couldn't help myself. Stole your uniform, your belongings, like some obsessed fool who didn't understand why he needed pieces of you close." They left the cellar together, Ophelia wrapped in Colton's cloak and tucked against his side where his wolf could feel her heartbeat. And as they climbed back into the light, she thought about how far they'd both come, from servant and king, hunter and hunted, to something infinitely more precious. Vespera's trial lasted 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. Ophelia's testimony, the healer's analysis of the poison tea, testimonies from servants who'd seen Vespera mixing compounds in her chambers. Several of Vespera's co-conspirators came forward once they realized she was caught, hoping for leniency. Through it all, Colton sat on his throne with Ophelia standing just behind him, a position of honor that didn't go unnoticed by the court. Whispers followed them everywhere, the king and his servant, the bloodied crown who'd gone soft over a maid. Let them whisper, Ophelia thought. She knew the truth, knew that Colton's growing mercy didn't make him weak. It made him stronger, more complete. On the second day, they called Ophelia to testify. She stood before the assembled court in a simple gray dress, servant's clothing, though Colton had offered her finer things, but she opted for no pretense. Lady Vespera abducted you from the servants' quarters, the magistrate said. Can you describe what happened in the cellar? Ophelia's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. She told them about waking bound in the dark, about Vespera's cold confession, about the vial of poison meant to stop her heart. And why do you think she wanted you dead? The magistrate asked. Ophelia's eyes found Colton's across the room. He sat perfectly still on his throne, but she could see the tension in every line of his body. The wolf barely leashed beneath his skin. Because I was helping the king, she said clearly, and she couldn't control him if he was clear-headed enough to see her for what she was. Vespera laughed, cold and cutting. How noble, the servant girl playing hero. Her smile was vicious. Tell them the rest, dear. Tell them what you really are, what you've been hiding. The court erupted in whispers. Ophelia's heart thundered in her ears, but she lifted her chin. I have an ability, she said, her voice ringing clear. I can neutralize poisons. It's why Lady Vespera's plot failed, and why she tried to kill me. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Colton stood. Which makes her the most valuable person in this kingdom, he said, his voice cutting through the shocked murmurs, and puts her under my personal protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens the crown. His eyes never left Ophelia's, and in them she saw no shame, no fear, only pride. On the third day, the council delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts. The sentence, execution by hanging at dawn. Colton accepted the ruling with a nod, his expression carefully neutral. But Ophelia felt the tension in his shoulders, the way his wolf prowled beneath his skin, wanting violence but choosing restraint. That night, in his chambers, he finally allowed himself to break. It should feel like justice, he said, staring into the fire. She tried to destroy me, tried to kill you. She deserves death. So why does it feel hollow? Ophelia moved to stand behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and pressing her cheek to his back. Because you've changed. The old Colton would have killed her in that cellar without a second thought. But you're not him anymore. I wanted to. His voice was raw. When I saw her with that vial, about to poison you, I wanted to tear her apart with my bare hands. But you didn't. You chose differently. He turned in her arms, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. Because of you, you make me want to be better. No. Ophelia reached up to cup his face. I just remind you of who you already are beneath the crown and the reputation. You're not a monster, Colton. You're a man who had to make impossible choices to protect his kingdom, but now you can make different ones. What if I don't know how? Then we learn together. He kissed her softly then, reverently, like she was precious beyond measure. They held each other in the firelight, letting the weight of the past days settle around them, the trial, the verdict, the knowledge that tomorrow would bring an execution, justice served, but still somehow bitter. But tonight, they had this, each other, and their ritual. Read with me? Colton asked quietly. his voice still rough with emotion but steadier now. I need something normal, something that's just us. With that, they settled into their usual spot by the fire. Ophelia reached for the book of poetry they'd been working through all week, but Colton gently redirected her hand to a different volume, one she didn't recognize. "Something new tonight," he said, and there was a tremor in his voice that made her look at him sharply. "What is it?" "You'll see. Start at the bookmark." She opened to the marked page, her eyes scanning the text. It appeared to be a collection of old wedding vows and bonding ceremonies. Curious, she began to read aloud, stumbling only slightly over the formal language. "I pledge to you my heart, my protection, my—" She stopped, her breath catching as she reached a section that definitely wasn't part of any traditional ceremony. The handwriting changed, became Colton's familiar script, inked directly onto the page. "Ophelia," she read, her voice shaking now. "Who taught me that strength can be gentle, that mercy is not weakness, that I could be more than the bloodied crown? You've been learning to read these past weeks, stumbling over words, gaining confidence, finding your voice, and I've been learning to read you." She looked up to find Colton had slid off the chair onto one knee beside her. "Keep reading," he said softly, his own eyes bright. "Every expression, every gesture, the way you bite your lip when you're thinking, the way your eyes light up when a passage moves you." Her tears spilled over. "I want to spend the rest of my life learning you. Every page, every line. I want to know your story so well I could recite it in the dark. Ophelia." His hands covered hers on the book. "Marry me. Bond with me. Let these be our vows." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes to every word. Yes to all of it." The joy that lit his face was breathtaking, raw and unguarded in a way that made her heart stutter. He surged up, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around before capturing her mouth in a kiss that was all heat and promise and barely leashed hunger. "Mine," he growled against her lips. "Say it." "Yours," Ophelia gasped. "Always yours." "Forever," he corrected, carrying her toward the bed. He loved her slowly that night, worshipping every inch of her skin with his hands and mouth. He buried his face against her throat, her collarbone, her curves, breathing her in like a famished man finally allowed to feast. His wolf had been hungry for a long time, but now that she was finally his, he took his time savoring her, tasting, claiming. "You smell incredible," he groaned against her skin, the words rough with need. His hands mapped her body with reverent possession, every touch a promise he whispered between kisses. And when they finally joined, moving together in perfect rhythm, the bond between them snapped fully into place, bright and burning and absolutely right. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the firelight, Ophelia's head on his chest and his hand stroking through her hair. "I was invisible for so long," she murmured, "hiding what I was, afraid to be seen. And then you looked at me with such wonder. Because you're wonderful." Colton's arms tightened around her. "I'm the luckiest person alive." "You?" She tilted her head to look at him, eyebrow raised. "I'm the one who gets to marry a king. A king with more enemies than allies, and a nickname that makes children cry. A king who looked at my powers and didn't run." She traced the line of his jaw. "I think that makes me the lucky one." "We could argue about this all night." "We could," she agreed, smiling against his skin. "But I think we both won." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the bond humming between them like a song. And for the first time since taking the throne, Colton slept through the entire night without nightmares. The bonding ceremony was held in the palace gardens under a full moon. Ophelia wore deep blue silk that made her eyes luminous, and Colton wore formal leathers marked with his family crest. The court watched with varying degrees of approval and scandal as their king bonded himself to a former maid. Let them talk, Ophelia thought as she spoke her vows. She'd learned that their opinions didn't define her worth. When Colton slipped the bonding mark onto her wrist, a delicate silver cuff etched with wolves and lavender, she felt the bond solidify completely. Not a chain, but a bridge connecting them while leaving room for each to remain whole. "I choose you," Colton said, loud enough for the entire court to hear. "Not because I need you to survive, not because you're my cure or my salvation, but because you make me want to be the best version of myself, because loving you is the most rewarding thing I've ever done." Ophelia's throat tightened with emotion. "I choose you too. The ruthless king and the gentle man, the wolf who fights himself to protect others. All of you. Every complicated, beautiful piece." When they kissed, sealing the bond, the gardens erupted in applause. Even the skeptics couldn't deny the love evident between them. The celebration lasted until dawn, but Colton and Ophelia slipped away long before then. They had more important things to attend to than political niceties. In his chambers, their chambers now, Colton pulled her close and buried his face in her neck, breathing in deep. "Still can't get enough of my scent?" Ophelia teased. "Never." His lips brushed the sensitive spot below her ear. "You smell like home, like everything I didn't know I was missing. Lavender and clean linen? And you, always you." He pulled back to meet her eyes. "Thank you." "For what?" "For barging into my study that night, and for not running away, for seeing past my crown and my less than stellar reputation." His smile was crooked, catching at one corner like he couldn't quite believe his luck. "For choosing me when you had every reason not to." Ophelia kissed him softly. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," he corrected. "First was agreeing to help me instead of reporting me for stealing your uniform." She laughed, and he captured the sound with another kiss that turned hungry fast. He walked her backward toward the bed, hands already working at the ties of her dress, mouth hot against her throat. "Mine," he growled against her skin, and she felt the word everywhere. When they finally made it to the bed, Colton loved her with the same intensity as always, but now there was a rightness to it, a completeness. His hands mapped every curve like he was memorizing her all over again. He took his time, despite the urgency thrumming between them, until she was arching into his touch and gasping his name. They moved together with the perfect rhythm of mates who knew exactly what the other needed, building and burning until they shattered together. Later, as Ophelia drifted towards sleep wrapped in her mate's arms, she thought about how far they'd both come. From hiding and surviving to loving and thriving, from servant and king to partners and equals. She'd rushed into his study looking for a missing uniform and found her future instead. Fair trade, she thought, smiling against his chest. The best trade she'd ever made. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts, and if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories.